The Men of Yarnith by Lord Dunsany. The men of Yarnith hold that nothing began until Yarnith uplifted his hand. Yarnith, they say, has the form of a man, but is greater, and is a thing of rock. When he uplifted his hand, all the rocks that wander beneath the dome, by which name they call the sky, gathered together around Yarnith. Of the other worlds they say naught, but hold that the stars are the eyes of all the other gods that look on Yarnith and laugh, for they are all greater than he, though they have gathered no worlds around them. Yet though they be greater than Yarnith, and though they laugh at him when they speak together beneath the dome, they all speak of Yarnith. Unheard is the speaking of the gods to all except the gods, but the men of Yarnith tell of how their prophet Iron, lying in the sand desert, Azrakhan, heard once their speaking, and knew thereby how Yarnith departed from all the other gods to clothe himself with rocks and make a world. Certain it is that every legend tells that at the end of the valley of Yodeth, where it becomes lost among black cliffs, there sits a figure colossal against a mountain, whose form is the form of a man with the right hand uplifted, but vaster than the hills. And in the book of secret things, which the prophets keep in the temple that stands in Yarnith, is writ the story of the gathering of the world, as Iron heard it when the gods spake together, up in the stillness above Azrakhan. And all that read this may learn how Yarnith drew the mountains about him like a cloak, and piled the world below him. It is not set in writing for how many years Yarnith sat clothed with rocks at the end of the valley of Yodeth, while there was naught in all the world save rocks and Yarnith. But one day there came another god running over the rocks across the world, and he ran as the clouds run upon days of storm, and as he sped towards Yodeth, Yarnith, sitting against his mountain with right hand uplifted, cried out, "What dost thou, running across my world, and whither art thou going?" And the new god answered never a word, but sped onwards, and as he went to left of him and to right of him, there sprang up green things all over the rocks of the world of Yarnith. So the new god ran round the world and made it green, saying in the valley where Yarnith sat, monstrous against his mountain, and certain lands wherein Credoa, the drought, browsed horribly at night. Further, the writing in the book tells of how there came yet another god, running speedily out of the east, as swiftly as the first, with his face set westward, and not to stay his running, and how he stretched both arms outward beside him, and to the left of him and to the right of him, as he ran, the whole world whitened. And Yarnith called out, "What dost thou, running across my world?" And the new god answered, "I bring the snow for all the world, whiteness and resting and stillness." And he stilled the running of streams, and laid his hand even upon the head of Yarnith, and muffled the noises of the world, till there was no sound in all lands, but the running of the new god that brought the snow, as he sped across the plains. But the two new gods chased each other for ever round the world, and every year they passed again, running down the valleys, and up the hills, and away across the plains, before Yarnith, whose hand uplifted had gathered the world about him. And furthermore, the very devout may read how all the animals came up the valley of Yodeth to the mountain whereon rested Yarnith, saying, "Give us leave to live, to be lions, rhinoceroses, and rabbits, and to go about the world." And Yarnith gave leave to the animals to be lions, rhinoceroses, and rabbits, and all the other kinds of beasts, and to go about the world. But when they had all gone, he gave leave to the bird to be a bird, and to go about the sky. And further, there came a man into that valley, who said, "Yarnith, thou hast made animals into thy world. O Yarnith, ordain that there be men." So Yarnith made men. Then was there in the world Yarnith, the two strange gods that brought the greenness and the growing and the whiteness and the stillness, and animals and men. And the god of the greenness pursued the god of the whiteness, and the god of the whiteness pursued the god of the greenness, and men pursued animals, and animals pursued men. But Yarnith Zai sat still against his mountain, with his right hand uplifted. But the men of Yarnith say that when the arm of Yarnith Zai shall cease to be uplifted, the world shall be flung behind him, as a man's cloak is flung away. And Yarnith Zai, no longer clad with the world, shall go back into the emptiness beneath the dome among the stars, as a diver seeking pearls goes down from the islands. It is writ in Yarnith's histories by scribes of old that there passed a year over the valley of Yarnith that bore not with it any rain, and the famine from the wastes beyond, finding that it was dry and pleasant in Yarnith, crept over the mountains and down their slopes, and sunned himself at the edge of Yarnith's fields. And men of Yarnith, laboring in the fields, found the famine as he nibbled at the corn and chased the cattle, and hastily they drew water from deep wells and cast it over the famine's dry grey fur and drove him back to the mountains. But the next day, when his fur was dry again, the famine returned and nibbled more of the corn and chased the cattle further, and again men drove him back. But again the famine returned, and there came a time when there was no more water in the wells to frighten the famine with, and he nibbled the corn till all of it was gone, and the cattle he chased grew very lean. And the famine drew nearer, even to the houses of men, and trampled on their gardens at night, and ever came creeping nearer to their doors. At last the cattle were able to run no more, and one by one the famine took them by their throats and dragged them down. And at night he scratched in the ground, killing even the roots of things, and came and peered in at the doorways, and started back and peered in at the door again a little further, but yet was not bold enough to enter altogether, for fear that men should have water to throw over his dry grey fur. Then did the men of Yarnith pray to Yarnith Zai, as he sat far off beyond the valley, praying to him night and day to call his famine back. But the famine sat and purred and slew all the cattle, and dared at last to take men for his food. And the histories tell how he slew children first, and afterwards grew bolder and tore down women, till at last he even sprang at the throats of men as they labored in the fields. Then said the men of Yarnith, "There must go one to take our prayers to the feet of Yarnith Zai, for the world at evening utters many prayers, and it may be that Yarnith Zai, as he hears all earth lamenting when the prayers at evening flutter to his feet, may have missed among so many the prayers of the men of Yarnith. But if one go and say to Yarnith Zai, 'There is a little crease in the outer skirts of thy cloak that men call the valley of Yarnith, where the famine is a greater lord than Yarnith Zai,' it may be that he shall remember for an instant and call his famine back." Yet all men feared to go, seeing that they were but men, and Yarnith Zai was lord of the whole earth, and the journey was far and rocky. But that night Hothrun Dath heard the famine whining outside his house and pawing at his door. Therefore it seemed to him more meet to wither before the glance of Yarnith Zai than that the whining of that famine should ever again fall upon his ears. So about the dawn Hothrun Dath crept away, fearing still to hear behind him the breathing of the famine, and set out upon his journey whither pointed the graves of men. For men in Yarnith are buried with their feet and faces turned toward Yarnith Zai, lest he might beckon to them in their night and call them to him. So all day long did Hothrun Dath follow the way of the graves. It is told that he even journeyed for 3 days and nights with naught but the graves to guide him, as they pointed towards Yarnith Zai, where all the world slopes upwards towards Yodath, and the great black rocks that are nearest to Yarnith Zai lie gathered together by clans, till he came to the 2 great black pillars of Astarinth, and saw the rocks beyond them piled in a dark valley, narrow and aloof, and knew that this was Yodath. Then did he haste no more, but walked quietly up the valley, daring not to disturb the stillness, for he said, "Surely this is the stillness of Yarnith Zai, which lay about him before he clothed himself with rocks. Here among the rocks which first had gathered to the call of Yarnith's eye, Hothrun Dath felt a mighty fear, but yet went onwards because of all his people, and because he knew that thrice in every hour, in some dark chamber, Death and Famine met to speak two words together, the end. But as dawn turned the darkness into grey, he came to the valley's end, and even touched the foot of Yarnith's eye, but saw him not, for he was all hidden in the mist. Then Hothrun Dath feared that he might not behold him to look him in the eyes when he sent up his prayer. But laying his forehead against the foot of Yarnith's eye, he prayed for the men of Yarnith, saying, O Lord of Famine and Father of Death, there is a spot in the world that thou hast cast about thee, which men call Yarnith, and there men die before the time thou hast apportioned passing out of Yarnith. Perchance the famine hath rebelled against thee, or death exceeds his powers. O Master of the world, drive out the famine as a moth out of thy cloak, lest the gods beyond, that regard thee with their eyes, say, There is Yarnith's eye, and lo, his cloak is tattered. And in the mist no sign made Yarnith's eye. Then did Hothrun Dath pray to Yarnith's eye to make some sign with his uplifted hand, that he might know he heard him. In the awe and silence he waited, until nigh the dawn the mist that hid the figure rolled upwards. Serene above the mountains, he brooded over the world, silent, with right hand uplifted. What Hothrun Dath saw there upon the face of Yarnith's eye no history telleth, or how he came again alive to Yarnith. But this is writ that he fled, and none hath since beheld the face of Yarnith's eye. Some say that he saw a look on the face of that image that set a horror tingling through his soul, but it is held in Yarnith that he found the marks of instruments of carving about the figure's feet, and discerning thereby that Yarnith's eye was wrought by the hands of men, he fled down the valley screaming, There are no gods, and all the world is lost. And hope departed from him, and all the purposes of life. Motionless behind him, lit by the rising sun, sat the colossal figure with right hand uplifted, that man had made in his own image. But the men of Yarnith tell how Hothrun Dath came back again panting to his own city, and told the people that there were no gods, and that Yarnith had no hope from Yarnith's eye. Then the men of Yarnith, when they knew that the famine came not from the gods, arose and strove against him. They dug deep for wells, and slew goats for food high up on Yarnith's mountains, and went afar and gathered blades of grass where yet it grew, that their cattle might live. Thus they fought the famine, for they said, If Yarnith's eye be not a god, then is there nothing mightier in Yarnith than men, and who is the famine that he should bare his teeth against the lords of Yarnith? And they said, If no help cometh from Yarnith's eye, then there is no help but from our own strength and might, and we be Yarnith's gods, with the saving of Yarnith burning within us, or its doom according to our desire. And some more the famine slew, but others raised their hands, saying, These be the hands of gods, and drave the famine back till he went from the houses of men, and out among the cattle. And still the men of Yarnith pursued him, till above the heat of the fight came the million whispers of rain heard faintly far off towards evening. Then the famine fled away howling back to the mountains, and over the mountains' crests, and became no more than a thing that is told in Yarnith's legends. 1,000 years have passed across the graves of those that fell in Yarnith by the famine. But the men of Yarnith still pray to Yarnith's eye, carved by men's hands in the likeness of a man, for they say, It may be that the prayers we offer to Yarnith's eye may roll upwards from his image as do the mists at dawn, and somewhere find at last the other gods, or that God who sits behind the others, of whom our prophets know not.